Good day, church. Back with another video, and want to talk to you this week on another update about something that's been on my heart a lot. Maybe it's been on your heart, and maybe it's something that you really don't want to talk about at all. That is the topic of change. It's a difficult topic to broach because often people don't like change. If we're being honest, none of us really like change, and that's completely normal because change means loss. Whenever something changes, there's inevitably something that gets left behind, and that can be really hard for people because there are things that we love and we don't want to lose them. And in this season, when our world has changed so much, probably the last thing you want to hear me talk about is change because you're going, no, there's been enough of that. I'm good. But the reality is, change is the only constant in life. And it's happening whether we like it or not. And we are called to be people who embrace change. Even that verse in Romans 12 that we talk about oftentimes, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, is a verse that talks about change and being open to change. And so I just want to take a couple of minutes and talk about as we move out of COVID, whenever that happens, into whatever comes after, why we need to change and why we need to do things differently. And just take a couple of minutes to help you to begin to think about what's the rationale behind some of these updates that I've been giving you. Because maybe you're listening to them and you're going, this sounds terrible. I hope that's not the case. But if it is, I hope that as we talk more about this, and I hope that as you hear my heart in this and other videos, it'll help you to understand why we're doing some of these things. Not that we have a plan in place, but why we're moving in this direction, I guess is probably better stated. And what's driving that? What's leading us in that place? And the reason is that we need to change simply because this season has shown me, and I think most people who are people of faith, how desperately all of us need Christ. In this time of uncertainty, in this time of upheaval, in this time when the world has been so chaotic and there's been so much uncertainty around so many things, we have been people who have been blessed to know we have hope and an anchor in the storm. And for those who don't know Jesus, we have a responsibility to share that good news with them. And we know this, we understand this, and we want to share that good news with them. But the reality also is that the way the church was done before COVID, for a lot of people in the world, it just wasn't relevant. It wasn't meaningful. Now, I'm not saying we change everything just to make people happy, but the message of the cross and the message of Jesus and the message of the hope in Jesus is so important that we have to do whatever we can in order to reach the people around us who need to hear that message. And so that means we are going to have to be changing things. Now, as I said, we don't really know what that is. We're not sitting here with some master plan of change that we're going to unveil on you. This is something that God's stirring in my heart, God's stirring in the board's heart, God's stirring in the staff's heart. And we all look at this and go, Lord, you are calling us into something. We don't know what it is, but we want to follow and we want to be obedient because we recognize that call that you've placed on our lives to image Jesus by becoming love means we're going to have to be willing to change. We're going to have to be willing to let go of some things. We're going to have to be willing to do some things differently in the name of love. If you think about it, Jesus, the ultimate example of change for the sake of love. He always existed in heaven, eternally present as the only begotten Son of God, and yet changed, as Philippians 2 says, in such a way that he came to earth taking on human form and taking on the nature of a servant, motivated by love, he was willing to change. And I believe that in this season that we're in and in the season that God is leading us into, God is putting that same call on our lives and on our church. He's calling us to be willing to change for the sake of our neighbors, our friends, our families who need the hope that's found in Jesus. And that's why we need to be willing to be flexible and change and embrace new and embrace different, even though it's hard and even though it may mean some loss. Maybe you're wondering, what in the world's going to change? I don't know. I just know that things are going to change. They're going to be different. And I hope that your heart is where mine is and where the leadership of this church is, in that what Christ wants to do in us and what Christ wants to do through us is important enough that we're willing to change to allow that to happen. I think it's also important to say what can never change. Because when we're talking about change, that inevitably asks the question, what are those things that can change? What are those things that might not change? Well, there's a couple of things right off the top that I know will never change. Number one, we never want to change that Jesus is the focal point. We never want to change that it's all about him. We never want to change that we're followers of him and ultimately our lives are his and that he can do what he wants in and through them. And the second thing is that call that he's placed on our church to image him by becoming love. And that's really, I think, what needs to move us into being willing to embrace change. I know maybe these update videos are hard to hear because maybe you're just longing for things to go back. But as I've said last week and as I've said other times in the past, I don't believe God ever calls us back. He calls us forward. I don't want to be like the Israelites who, while they were in the desert, just longed to go back to Egypt because they couldn't grasp how amazing the promised land was going to be. We're right now in our own desert season called COVID, where things are weird and things are difficult, and it's just not what we thought it was ever going to be. And it's easy when we're in this season, in this desert season, to look back on what was before and think, I just want to go back to that. But the Israelites in the desert had no idea how awesome the place God was calling them to be, was going to be. And in the same way, I believe that God is calling us into something that we right now have no idea how awesome it's going to be. But it's not going to be found where we were. It's going to be found by following Christ into where he's leading us. And so I know change is hard, but if I can just leave you with this thought, let's be willing to embrace change. Because A, that's the example of Jesus. B, those around us desperately need it. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I love you. Miss you. Look forward to seeing you. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts on this or any of the other update videos, please, as always, either phone me, email me, text me, contact one of the pastors. We love to hear from you. Have an awesome week. God bless.